The emergency lights inside the crash shuttle blinked red, painting everything in the color of warning. Dr. Una Park pulled herself from the wreckage, her hands bleeding from small cuts, her legs shaking beneath her. The smell of burning metal filled the air. Smoke rose from the broken engine behind her. She stood in the middle of a forest she did not know, on a planet she had only seen in reports. Keller 7, a world marked for agricultural study, green, peaceful, uninhabited. That lost word echoed in her mind as she looked around. At the tall trees with their strange violet leaves. Uninhabited. She was supposed to be alone here. Una was 34 years old. She had spent 12 years studying plants on different worlds. She had seen jungles that glowed in the dark, flowers that sang when touched, and trees that walked slowly across plains over hundreds of years. But she had never been stranded before. The shuttle was dead. She knew that without checking. The way it had fallen from the sky, spinning and screaming through the atmosphere, told her everything. The engine had failed completely. There would be no fixing it. She limped back to the wreckage and began pulling out supplies. Emergency food packs, water purification tablets, a medical kit, her research equipment surprisingly undamaged, and most importantly, the distress beacon. Una activated the beacon and watched a small green light begin to pulse. Somewhere out in space, a signal was now traveling toward the nearest Federation outpost. Help would come. She just had to survive until then. The first 3 days were the hardest. She built a shelter from the shuttle's remains and fallen branches. She found a stream nearby with clean water. She tested the local plants carefully, identifying which ones might be safe and which ones might kill her. Her training kept her alive, but her loneliness tried to break her. At night, the forest came alive with sounds, clicking, chirping, howling in the distance. Una lay in her small shelter, listening to a world she did not understand, and wondered how long rescue would take. On the 7th day, she began to feel like she might actually be okay. Her shelter was solid now. She had found several edible plants and had created a small garden near her camp. The stream provided fresh water. Her injuries had healed. The beacon continued to pulse its green light, sending hope into the darkness of space. Una started to enjoy her work again. She walked through the forest each day, collecting samples and taking notes. The plants here were beautiful. Many had colors she had never seen before. Some responded to touch, curling their leaves when she came near. Others released sweet smells when the sun hit them. She talked to herself while she worked. It helped with the silence. "This one has a blue stem," she would say, holding up a flower. "The petals are soft, possibly used for reproduction through wind. Interesting structure." Her voice was the only human sound on the entire planet. On the 12th day, something changed. Una was examining a patch of mushrooms near a fallen log when she felt it. A sensation she could not explain. Like being watched. Like eyes on the back of her neck. She kept her body still, her hands continuing to work, but her eyes moved slowly across the forest around her. Shadows between trees. Leaves that moved without wind. And there, just for a moment, a flash of something that was not plant or rock. Movement. Deliberate movement. Una's heart began to beat faster, but she did not run. She did not scream. She simply continued her work, pretending she had noticed nothing, while her mind raced with questions. The planet was supposed to be uninhabited. Every scan said so. Every report had confirmed it. But something was watching her. Something was hiding in the shadows of this forest. She returned to her camp earlier than usual that day. She reinforced her shelter. She organized her emergency flares. And she slept with her boots on. The feeling of being watched did not go away. Over the next several days, Una began to notice patterns. The watchers, whatever they were, seemed most active at dawn and dusk. They stayed in the thick parts of the forest, never entering the clearing where her camp was built. They moved in groups, circling her position like hunters studying prey. On day 15, she saw one of them clearly for the first time. She was collecting water from the stream when movement caught her eye. Across the water, partially hidden behind a bush, a creature stood watching her. It was about 1 meter tall, covered in fur that seemed to change color as the light touched it. Its eyes were large and bright, reflecting the afternoon sun like mirrors. It had a long tail and claws that she could see even from this distance. A predator. Young from its size, but still dangerous. The creature watched her for a long moment. Then it slipped back into the forest and disappeared. Yuna's hands were shaking as she carried the water back to camp. But she did not run. She walked at her normal pace, keeping her breathing steady, refusing to show fear. That night, she heard them moving around her camp. Soft footsteps. Low sounds that might have been communication. She counted at least 5 or 6 different voices. They were learning her, studying her, waiting for the right moment. On day 17, they tested her. Yuna was preparing her evening meal when 3 of the creatures rushed toward her camp from different directions. They moved fast, their fur changing to match the colors of the forest floor. Their claws were extended. Their eyes were fixed on her. Yuna grabbed an emergency flare and activated it. Bright red light exploded into the air with a loud hissing sound. The creatures stopped immediately, their eyes wide with surprise. They turned and ran back into the forest. Yuna stood in the middle of her camp, the flare burning in her hand, her whole body shaking. But she had not run. She had not panicked. She had stood her ground that the creatures did not attack again that night. On day 19, Yuna made a decision. She could not keep living like this. The flares would run out eventually. The creatures were clearly intelligent. They would learn that the bright lights were not actually dangerous. Sooner or later, they would attack for real. Running was not an option. They were faster than her. Fighting was not an option. There were too many of them. Her only chance was something else entirely. She needed to understand them. That morning, Yuna walked to the edge of her camp and sat down on the grass. She did not work. She did not collect samples. She simply sat there in full view of the forest and watched. She saw the creatures watching back. Their color-changing fur rippled with confusion. This was not how prey was supposed to act. "I see you," Yuna said softly, her voice calm and steady. "I know you are there, and I'm not afraid." The forest was silent. The creatures did not move. Yuna smiled and began to hum an old song from Earth, a simple melody her mother used to sing. She sat there for hours, humming and watching, showing the predators something they had never seen before, a prey animal that refused to be prey. When the sun began to set, Yuna stood up slowly and walked back to her shelter. She could feel their eyes on her the entire time. But for the first time since she had noticed them, she felt something other than fear. She felt curious. What were these creatures? Why were they watching her? And what would happen if she stopped treating them as enemies and started treating them as something else? The answers would come soon enough. But first, she needed to survive another night. Yuna closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the alien forest. Somewhere in the darkness, 6 fierce cubs were watching and wondering the same thing she was wondering. What happens next? The morning sun rose over the forest of Keller 7, painting the violet leaves in shades of gold and pink. Yuna Park opened her eyes slowly, listening to the sounds of the waking world. Birds called to each other in strange melodies. Insects hummed in the grass. And somewhere nearby, she could hear the soft breathing of creatures that had been watching her all night. She had slept surprisingly well. The decision she made the day before had given her peace. She was done being afraid. She was done waiting for the attack that might never come. From now on, she would learn. Yuna crawled out of her shelter and stretched her arms toward the sky. She could see movement in the forest edge, shadows shifting between trees, eyes catching the early light. They were still there. They were always there. "Good morning," she said toward the forest. Her voice was friendly, casual, like she was greeting neighbors. "I hope you slept well too." There was no response. She did not expect one, but she saw the shadows stop moving. Surprised by her attention, Yuna went about her morning routine slowly and deliberately. She boiled water for drinking. She ate a small breakfast from her emergency supplies. She washed her face in the stream. All the while, she kept her movements calm and predictable. The creatures watched everything. By day 23, Yuna had learned many things about her watchers. There were 6 of them, as she had guessed. All young, probably juveniles. Their fur could change color to match their surroundings, making them nearly invisible when they wanted to be. But she had learned to spot them anyway. A patch of grass that moved wrong. A shadow that was too dark. Eyes that reflected light like tiny stars. They were predators. That much was obvious from their claws, their teeth, their hunting behavior. But they were also intelligent. She could see it in the way they communicated with each other, using sounds and body movements. She could see it in the way they adapted their strategies when she surprised them. Most interesting of all, they seemed genuinely curious about her. Predators did not usually waste time watching prey for weeks. They attacked, killed, and ate. But these creatures were different. They seemed more interested in understanding her than eating her. Maybe it was because she was something new. Maybe it was because she did not act like prey. Or maybe there was another reason entirely. Yuna was determined to find out. She started keeping detailed notes about each of the 6 creatures. She gave them names to help tell them apart. The boldest one, who always led the approaches, she called Bora. His fur had a slight violet tint even when he was trying to hide. He was clearly the leader of the group. The smallest one she named Hana. She moved with quick, nervous energy and stayed close to the others. Yuna thought she might be the youngest. One of them had a scar across his muzzle, probably from a fight. She called him Dory. He was cautious and slow to trust, always staying further back than the others. The remaining 3 she named Miru, Gom, and Isiel. Miru was the fastest. Gom was the largest. Isiel had a habit of tilting her head when she was confused. Naming them made them feel less like monsters and more like individuals. On day 25, Yuna made an interesting discovery. That she was following a trail through the forest, looking for new plant samples, when she noticed Bora watching her from a nearby tree. He was not hiding this time. He was sitting on a low branch, his luminous eyes fixed on her with open curiosity. Yuna stopped walking and looked back at him. "Hello, Bora," she said softly. The creature's ears moved forward at the sound of her voice. His fur rippled with colors she had not seen before. Confusion? Interest? She could not tell. "I am not going to hurt you," she continued. "I am just here to study plants. That is all." That is all. Bora made a sound. A low warble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. It was not aggressive. It almost sounded like a question. Yuna smiled. "I do not understand you either, but maybe we can learn." She slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of dried fruit from her rations. She placed it on the ground in front of her and took several steps back. Bora watched her carefully. His eyes moved between her face and the fruit on the ground. Minutes passed in silence. Then, slowly, he climbed down from the tree. He approached the fruit with careful steps, never taking his eyes off Yuna. When he reached it, he sniffed it carefully. Then he picked it up with one clawed hand and put it in his mouth. He chewed. He swallowed. And then he made that warbling sound again. Yuna laughed softly. "You are welcome." That night, she found a smooth stone outside her shelter. It had been placed there deliberately, arranged on a small pile of leaves. A gift. An offering in return for the fruit she had given. The creatures were not just intelligent. They understood exchange. They understood kindness. Yuna held the stone in her hand and felt tears forming in her eyes. For the first time since her crash, she did not feel alone. Over the next several days, a strange relationship began to form. Yuna left small pieces of food at the edge of her camp each evening. In the morning, the food was gone, replaced by small gifts. Interesting leaves. Colorful rocks. Once, a feather from a bird she had never seen. The creatures came closer each day. They stopped hiding so carefully. Sometimes Yuna would look up from her work and find all 6 of them sitting at the edge of the clearing, watching her with their bright eyes. She talked to them constantly. She told them about her life on Earth. She explained her research. She described the stars and the ships that traveled between them. They did not understand her words, but they seemed to enjoy the sound of her voice. Bora was always the closest. He had accepted her completely now. Sometimes he would follow her on her walks through the forest, keeping a respectful distance, but never letting her out of his sight. Hana remained nervous, but curious. She would creep closer and closer, then run away when Yuna looked at her directly. It reminded Yuna of a shy child. Duri still kept his distance. The scar on his muzzle told a story of past pain, and he was not ready to trust so easily. Yuna respected that. Trust had to be earned. On day 27, everything changed. Yuna was returning to camp after a long walk when she noticed the creatures acting strangely. They were gathered at the edge of the forest, making sounds she had never heard before. High, sharp cries that echoed through the trees. Alarm calls. They were warning her about something. Yuna stopped and looked around. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then she noticed it. The ground was shaking. A low rumble was building in the distance. Earthquake. She had experienced small tremors before on other planets. But this felt different. Bigger. More dangerous. The creatures were running toward her now, abandoning all caution. Bora reached her first, his first cycling through rapid colors. He grabbed her sleeve with one clawed hand and pulled. He wanted her to follow. Yuna did not hesitate. She ran after the creatures as they led her through the forest. Behind her, she could hear trees falling. The ground cracked and split. The world was coming apart. They reached a rocky hill and climbed to the top just as the worst of the shaking hit. Yuna fell to her knees, covering her head with her arms. The creatures gathered around her, pressing close, their bodies warm against hers. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the earthquake stopped. Yuna looked up slowly. The forest below was damaged but not destroyed. Trees had fallen. New cracks had appeared in the ground. But her camp, she could see from here, was still standing. She was alive. They had saved her. Yuna looked at the 6 creatures gathered around her. They were watching her with worried eyes, their fur still showing signs of stress. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." Bora made his warbling sound and pressed his head against her shoulder. It was a gesture she understood perfectly. "You are part of our pack now." Yuna wrapped her arms around the fierce cub who had once stalked her through the forest. He was warm and soft and alive. And in that moment, she knew that everything had changed. She was no longer prey. She was no longer a stranger. She was family. The days after the earthquake were filled with discovery. Yuna walked through the damaged forest with her 6 companions, studying the changes the tremor had brought. New streams had formed where the ground had cracked. Some trees had fallen, opening gaps in the canopy that let sunlight touch the forest floor for the first time in years. Life was already adapting to the new landscape. The creatures, her pack, stayed close to her at all times now. There was no more hiding, no more stalking from shadows. They walked beside her openly, their color-changing fur relaxed into soft natural shades. Bara usually led the way. Hannah stayed near Yuna's legs. Dory watched the rear, still cautious of dangers, but no longer cautious of her. On the 29th day since her crash, Yuna made a decision that would change everything. She needed to know where these creatures came from. She needed to understand their story. "Where is your home?" she asked Bara that morning, kneeling down to meet his eyes. "Where did you come from before you found me?" Bara tilted his head at her words. He did not understand the language, but something in her tone must have communicated her question. He looked toward the eastern hills, then back at her. His ears moved in a gesture she had come to recognize as uncertainty. "Will you show me?" Yuna asked. She pointed toward the hills. "Take me there?" Bora made a low sound in his throat. He turned and began walking east. The other 5 creatures followed. Yuna grabbed her small bag of supplies and joined them. They walked for most of the day. The journey took them through parts of the forest Yuna had never explored. The plants here were different, older, larger. Some of the trees were so wide that 10 people holding hands could not circle their trunks. The air smelled of ancient growth and deep earth. The creatures moved with increasing nervousness as they traveled. Their fur shifted through anxious colors. They made sounds to each other that seemed like worried conversation. Yuna understood. They were going somewhere that held painful memories. Late in the afternoon, they reached their destination. It was a cave system built into the side of a rocky cliff. The entrance was partially blocked by fallen stones. Fresh cracks ran through the rock face, damage from the recent earthquake. But that was not what stopped Yuna's heart. Near the blocked entrance, half buried under rubble, she could see bodies. Adult creatures, much larger than the 6 cubs who had led her here. Their fur had lost its color in death, turned a dull gray. Some of them had clearly tried to escape when the rocks fell. Others seemed to have been deeper inside the cave when it collapsed. Parents, family members. The entire adult population of whatever group these cubs had belonged to. Yuna fell to her knees, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh no, I am so sorry." Bora approached one of the fallen adults slowly. He pressed his nose against the still form and made a sound that needed no translation. Grief. Pure, raw grief. The other cubs gathered around their fallen family members. Hana curled up beside a body that must have been her mother. Dory sat alone, staring at the blocked cave entrance with empty eyes. Miru, Gom, and Isiel huddled together, their fur dim and colorless. Yuna watched them mourn and felt her heart break. The earthquake that had struck before, her arrival must have caused this. These 6 young ones had survived only because they were outside when the cave collapsed. They have lost everyone. Everything. And then a strange creature had fallen from the sky. Suddenly, everything made sense. The stalking, the watching, the way they had circled her camp for weeks without attacking. They were not hunting her. They were studying her because they were alone and afraid and desperate for connection. They had found the only other intelligent being on the planet. And something in their young minds had wondered if maybe, somehow, she could help them. Yuna wiped her eyes and stood up slowly. "Listen to me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you cannot understand my words, but I need you to understand this." She walked to the center of the group and sat down on the rocky ground. "You are not alone anymore," she continued. "I am here, and I am not going to leave you." The cubs looked at her with their large, luminous eyes. Bora moved first, approaching her slowly and sitting down at her side. Then Hana came, then Miru and Gom and Isiel. Even Dory, cautious Dory, walked over and settled near the edge of the group. They sat together in silence as the sun began to set. Human and alien, bound by shared loneliness and the simple truth that no one should have to face loss alone. That night, they slept near the cave. Yuna did not suggest leaving. She understood that the cubs needed time to say goodbye. She stayed awake for hours, watching over them as they slept, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In the morning, she would need to make a plan. But for now, she simply sat with them in their grief. The return journey took 2 days. The cubs were quiet as they walked. Their usual playful energy was gone, replaced by a heavy sadness that hung over the group like a dark cloud. Yuna walked with them in silence, offering her presence as the only comfort she could give. When they finally reached her camp, Yuna made a decision. She gathered her supplies and began building. Using materials from the forest and pieces from her crashed shuttle, she constructed a larger shelter, one that could fit all 7 of them. The cubs watched her work with curious eyes, their grief slowly mixing with something else. Hope, perhaps. Or at least the beginning of hope. "This is our home now," Yuna told them when she finished. "All of us, together." Bora walked inside the new shelter first. He sniffed the walls, explored the corners, then returned to the entrance and made his warbling sound. Approval. One by one, the other cubs entered. They found spots to curl up, pressing against each other for warmth and comfort. Hana looked up at Yuna with her big eyes and made a soft chirping sound. "Thank you." Yuna smiled through her tears. "You are welcome, little one." That night, for the first time since she crashed on Keller 7, Yuna was not alone in her shelter. She lay in the middle of a pile of warm, breathing creatures. Bora was pressed against her back. Hana was curled up near her stomach. The others were arranged around them in a protective circle. Pack family home. The distress beacon was still, blinking its green light outside. Rescue would come eventually. Ships would arrive from the stars, filled with people who would have many questions about the creatures she had found. But Yuna was not worried about that. Not tonight. Tonight she was exactly where she needed to be. A lonely human in a shelter full of fierce cubs who had learned that she was not prey. She was something much more valuable than prey. She was theirs, and they were hers. In the darkness of the alien forest, 7 breathing forms slept peacefully. The night sounds continued around them. Wind through leaves, insects in the grass, the distant calls of creatures they would learn about together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new steps forward on a path none of them could see clearly yet. But tonight, there was only warmth, only safety, only the simple miracle of finding family in the most unexpected place. Yuna closed her eyes and smiled. She had come to this planet to study plants. She had found something far more precious, and she would protect it with everything she had. The fierce cubs who had once stalked her were now her responsibility. Her companions, her children, in all the ways that mattered, and she would never let them be alone again. 40 days had passed since Yuna Park crashed on Keller 7. In that time, she had changed from a stranded scientist into something she never expected to become. A mother, a leader, a pack. The morning routine had become familiar now. She woke to the sound of the cubs stirring around her. Bora always rose first, stretching his long body and shaking out his violet-tinted fur. He would walk to the shelter entrance and look outside, checking for any dangers before signaling that it was safe. Then the others would wake. Hana usually climbed onto Yuna's chest first, her small face close enough to bump noses. Her way of saying good morning. Miru and Gom would bound outside immediately, full of young energy. Isiel moved slowly, still sleepy, her fur cycling through soft colors. Dory woke last, always careful, always watching. This morning was no different. "Good morning, everyone," Yuna said, sitting up slowly so Hana could slide off her chest. Let us see what today brings. She had started teaching them words. Simple ones at first. Morning, food, water, sleep. They could not speak them back, but they were learning to understand. When she said food, their ears would perk up. When she said sleep, they would settle down. It was progress. Today, she had planned something special. We are going to try something new, she announced, pulling out her botanical equipment. You are going to help me with my work. The cubs gathered around her, curious as always. Una held up a small container and showed them the seeds inside. These are from a plant I found last week. I want to see if they will grow near our camp. Your job is to help me find good soil. She demonstrated what she meant by digging her fingers into the ground and checking the dirt. Bora watched intently, then began imitating her actions. Soon all 6 cubs were digging, their sharp claws much more effective than her human hands. Una laughed as they worked. Yes, exactly like that. Look for soil that is dark and soft. They spent the morning planting together. The cubs took to the task with surprising enthusiasm. Miru discovered that he loved digging holes. Hana became very protective of the seeds, growling softly at anyone who got too close to the ones she had helped plant. Even Duri participated, using his claws to break up hard chunks of dirt. By noon, they had planted 30 seeds in a neat row near the stream. Beautiful work, Una praised them. If these grow, we will have vegetables in a few weeks. She had been thinking a lot about the future lately. Her emergency rations would not last forever. She needed to establish sustainable food sources. The plants on Keller 7 were mostly edible for humans, but variety would keep her healthy. And she had started wondering if the cubs might benefit from some cultivated foods too. They were hunters by nature, but they seemed to enjoy the fruits and vegetables she shared with them. Perhaps their diet could be expanded. Perhaps she could teach them new ways to find food that did not require hunting. After the planting, they went on their daily walk through the forest. Una had mapped much of the area now. She knew where the good berry bush grew. She knew which clearings caught the most sunlight. She knew the paths that led to the best views of the surrounding mountains. The cubs had their own knowledge to share. They showed her which plants were safe and which were dangerous. They led her to a hidden waterfall she never would have found on her own. They taught her which sounds meant danger and which meant food was nearby. Together, they were learning to survive. On day 42, something wonderful happened. Una was sitting near the stream, writing notes about her observations, when Bora approached her carrying something in his mouth. He dropped it at her feet and sat back, his tail swishing with pride. Thought it was a small animal, freshly caught. Food? For me? Una asked, surprised. Bora made his warbling sound. Yes, for you. Una felt tears forming in her eyes again. In her time studying alien species, she had learned that predators rarely shared food. When they did, it was usually only with family. With pack members, they valued above all others. Bora was treating her as true family now. Not a curiosity. Not a temporary friend. Real family. Thank you, she whispered, accepting the gift. Thank you so much. That night, she cooked the meat over a small fire while the cubs watched with fascination. They had never seen fire before. At first they were afraid, keeping their distance and making nervous sounds. But when they smelled the cooking food, their fear began to fade. Una shared the meal with all of them. It was not much, divided 7 ways, but it meant everything. They were providing for each other now, caring for each other, acting as a true pack should. After dinner, something else happened that made the day even more special. Hana climbed into Una's lap, which she did often. But this time, she did something new. She pressed her small head against Una's chest and began making a sound. A low, rhythmic vibration that Yuna could feel through her whole body, purring. The little cub was purring. Yuna held her breath, afraid to move and break the spell. One by one, the other cubs approached and settled against her. Miru pressed against her left side. Gon leaned on her right. Isiel curled up at her feet. Bora stretched out behind her, his warm body supporting her back. Even Duri came close. He did not touch her directly, but he lay down within arm's reach, closer than he had ever been before. And then they were all purring. 6 voices creating a harmony that vibrated through Yuna's bones. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She sat there for hours, surrounded by warmth and love, listening to the music of her new family. The stars came out above them. The forest settled into night, and Yuna Park, botanist and accidental mother, felt a peace she had never known before. The days continued to pass. Yuna taught the cubs more words. They taught her their gestures and sounds. A complex language was forming between them, built from pieces of both their worlds. She could not speak their language perfectly, and they could not understand all of hers. But they found ways to communicate anyway. On day 45, Duri finally let her touch and Dot. It happened during a rainstorm. The 7 of them were huddled in the shelter, listening to water pound against the roof. Lightning flashed outside. Thunder rolled across the sky. Duri was shaking. The sounds reminded him of the earthquake, of the day his world collapsed. Yuna could see the fear in his eyes. Slowly, carefully, she reached out her hand toward him. She did not grab or push. She simply offered. Duri looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, with trembling movements, he pressed his scarred muzzle against her palm. Yuna felt the rough texture of his old wound. She felt the softness of his fur. She felt the trust that had taken so long to build finally being given. "I have got you," she whispered. "You are safe. We are all safe together." Duri closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. His shaking slowly stopped. The fear in his posture faded. When the storm ended, something had changed. Duri was no longer the distant one. He still moved carefully, still watched everything with suspicious eyes. But he stayed closer to the group now, closer to her. The pack was complete. On day 48, Yuna realized she was running out of time, not her own time. The cubs' time. They were growing. Every day they were a little bigger, a little stronger, a little more skilled. Soon they would be adults. They would need to learn how to survive on their own, without her help. And eventually, rescue would come. The distress beacon was still working. A ship would arrive someday. And then what? Yuna could not leave them. She knew that now. These 6 creatures had become her family. Leaving them behind was unthinkable. But she also could not stay on Keller 7 forever. She had work to do, knowledge to share, a life that existed beyond this single planet. The answer, she realized, was simple. She would take them with her. It would not be easy. The Federation had rules about alien species. There would be questions, examinations, bureaucratic obstacles of all kinds. But Yuna was determined. She would fight for them. She would protect them. She would make sure they had a place in the wider galaxy. They were not just interesting specimens to be studied. They were people. Different from humans, yes, but people nonetheless. Intelligent, emotional, capable of love and grief and trust. The universe needed to know about them. And Yuna would be the one to tell their story. But for now, there was still time. Time to teach and learn. Time to grow together. Time to enjoy the simple miracle of family found in the most unexpected place. Yuna looked at her 6 cubs, playing in the afternoon sunlight, and smiled. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Pack, family, forever. The 52nd day began like any other. Yuna woke to Hana's small face pressed against hers. She smiled and gently moved the young cub aside, sitting up slowly so as not to disturb the others. The morning light was filtering through the shelter entrance, painting everything in soft gold. Bora was already awake, standing at the entrance with his ears pointed toward the sky. His fur was cycling through unusual colors. Something had caught his attention. "What is it?" Yuna asked, crawling out of the shelter to join him. Then she heard it too, a sound she had not heard in 52 days. The distant roar of ship engines. Yuna's heart stopped. She looked up and saw a bright spot in the morning sky, growing larger with every second. A Federation patrol ship, its distinctive shape becoming clearer as it descended through the atmosphere. Rescue had finally come. The other cubs emerged from the shelter, alarmed by the strange noise. They clustered around Yuna, their fur shifting to anxious colors. Miru growled at the sky. Dori moved to the back of the group, ready to flee. Only Bora stood firm, positioning himself between Yuna and the approaching ship. "It is okay," Yuna said, though her voice was shaking. "They are here to help. They are my people." But even as she said the words, fear gripped her chest. How would the rescue team react to the cubs? Would they see them as dangerous? Would they try to hurt them? Yuna made a decision in that moment. She stood up straight and put herself in front of her pack. "Stay close to me," she told them. "No matter what happens, stay close." The ship landed in the clearing near her camp. The engines powered down. A door opened on the side. Lieutenant Taiho Kim was the first to step out. He was a young man with a serious face and a plasma rifle held ready in his hands. Two other officers followed behind him, equally armed. They scanned the area with professional efficiency, looking for threats. Then Taiho saw Yu and a Dot, and the 6 alien creatures gathered around her. "Dr. Park?" he called out, his voice uncertain. "That is me," Yuna replied. She did not move from her position. "Lower your weapons, Lieutenant. These creatures are not dangerous." Taiho hesitated. His eyes moved from Yuna to the cubs and back again. The rifle in his hands did not move. "Dr. Park, please step away from the alien life forms. We need to assess the situation." Yuna felt Bora press against her leg. She could feel his heart beating fast through his fur. He was scared. They were all scared. "I will not step away," she said firmly. "These creatures saved my life. They are my family now, and I will not let anyone hurt them." The standoff lasted for several long seconds. Taiho looked at his fellow officers. They looked back at him, equally uncertain about what to do. Then Hana did something that changed everything. The small cub crept forward, past Yuna's protective stance, and approached Taiho directly. She moved slowly, her body low to the ground, her luminous eyes fixed on his face. When she reached him, she sat down at his feet and tilted her head. Curiosity, pure, innocent curiosity. Taiho looked down at the small creature. His grip on the rifle loosened. Something in his expression softened. "She's not afraid," he said quietly. "No," Yuna agreed, allowing herself to smile. "She is curious. They all are. They just want to understand." Hana made a small chirping sound and pressed her head against Taiho's knee. The gesture was unmistakable. "Greeting. Welcome." The lieutenant exhaled slowly and lowered his weapon. The other officers did the same. "All right, Dr. Park," he said. "Why don't you tell us what happened here?" Yuna talked for over an hour. She told them about the crash, about the weeks of being watched, about the moment she decided to stop being afraid and start being curious instead. She told them about the earthquake, the collapsed cave, the orphan cubs who had lost everything. She told them about the pack she had built, the family she had found. The officers listened in silence. Their expressions changed as the story continued. Suspicion gave way to interest. Interest gave way to something like wonder. When Yuna finished, Taiho was quiet for a long moment. "You were telling me," he said slowly, "that you made first contact with an unknown sapient species. By yourself. With no training in xenodiplomacy. And you did it by sitting still and asking them why they were hiding?" Yuna laughed. "That is exactly what I am telling you." Taiho shook his head in disbelief. "The Federation is going to have a lot of questions for you, Dr. Park." "I know," she said, "and I will answer all of them. But first, I need something from you." "What is that?" "These creatures are coming with me." Silence fell over the clearing. The other officers exchanged nervous glances. Even Taiho looked uncertain. "Dr. Park, there are regulations about transporting unknown species. Quarantine procedures. Safety protocols. I cannot just—" "They are not unknown species," Yuna interrupted. "They are people. Young people who lost their families and found a new one. I am not asking you to break regulations, Lieutenant. I am asking you to help me protect them." She knelt down and gestured for the cubs to come closer. They gathered around her, pressing against her sides, their fur slowly settling into calm colors. "Look at them," Yuna continued softly. "They are intelligent. They feel love and grief and fear and hope. They deserve a chance to live. And I will fight with everything I have to give them that chance." Taiho looked at the 7 figures before him. The human woman surrounded by 6 alien creatures who clearly adored her. The pact that had formed against all odds on this distant world. He sighed and put his rifle away completely. "I am going to have so much paperwork because of this," he said. Yuna grinned. "I will help you fill it out." The journey back to Federation space took 2 weeks. During that time, Yuna worked with the ship's crew to make the cubs comfortable. They set up a special area for them to sleep. They figured out what foods they could eat. They ran basic medical scans to make sure everyone was healthy. The cubs adapted to ship life faster than anyone expected. They were fascinated by everything. The humming of the engines. The lights that turned on and off. The windows that showed stars instead of sky. Bora became popular with the crew. He would walk through the corridors, greeting everyone he met with his warbling sound. The officers who had been ready to shoot him on Keller 7 now saved treats from their meals to give him. Hana attached herself to Taiho. She followed him everywhere, chirping happily whenever he paid attention to her. The series lieutenant found himself smiling more than he had in years. Even Duri began to relax. The ship was safe. The people were kind. There was food and warmth and no earthquakes. He started letting crew members approach him. He even accepted scratches behind his ears from a particularly gentle engineer. When they finally arrived at the Federation research station, a crowd was waiting. News of Yuna's discovery had spread fast. Scientists from dozens of fields wanted to meet the creatures she had found. Officials from the diplomatic corps wanted to discuss protocols. Media outlets wanted interviews. Yuna stepped off the ship with her pack gathered around her. She looked at the crowd and felt a moment of fear. So many people. So much attention. Then Bora pressed against her side, and she remembered why she was doing this. "Stay close," she murmured to her cubs. "I am right here." The weeks that followed were challenging but rewarding. The cubs, who Yuna formally named Kellerns after their home planet, were studied carefully by xenobiologists. The scientists were amazed by their intelligence, their social bonds, their ability to learn. Within months, the cubs were demonstrating tool use, solving complex problems, and beginning to understand human language at a basic level. Yuna became their official guardian and ambassador. She wrote reports about their species. She gave lectures about her experience. She fought endless bureaucratic battles to ensure they were treated as people, not specimens. It was exhausting work. But every night, She returned to her quarters and was greeted by 6 creatures who loved her unconditionally. They would pile onto her bed, purring their strange harmony, and she would fall asleep feeling grateful for every challenge she faced. Because this was what humans did. Not conquering, not destroying, not dominating through force. Humans could be brave enough to sit still when instinct screamed to run. Kind enough to offer food to creatures who would stalk them. Patient enough to earn trust one small gesture at a time. The fierce cubs who had stalked the lonely human were now ambassadors of their kind. The first members of an alien species to live among humans as friends. As family. And Dr. Una Park, botanist and accidental mother, had proven something that would echo through the Federation for generations. Sometimes, the greatest strength was not power. It was simply asking, with an open heart, why hide? And waiting with patience and love for the answer. The end.